San Isidro, Buenos Aires, 1985. A quiet neighborhood of large houses, imported cars, and families with well-known surnames. In one of those houses lived the Puccio family. Archimedes, the father, an accountant, a former government official, a respected man, his wife, his 5 children, a house always full of people, rugby players, neighbors. Everyone knew them. Everyone greeted them. Nobody knew that in the basement of that house, at this very moment, there was a woman in chains. In order to understand what Archimedes Puccio did, you need to understand Argentina in that moment. In 1983, the country had just emerged from 7 years of military dictatorship, a period where forced disappearances were commonplace, where the state had used kidnapping as a political weapon, where certain men had learned that a human being could be worth a great deal of money. Archimedes Puccio was no ordinary criminal. He was a former Army intelligence agent. Strong suspicions exist that he collaborated in operations during the dictatorship. When democracy returned, he lost his position, but he kept his contacts and his methods. He owned a small nautical supply store, a modest business for the life he wanted to maintain. He needed another source of income, and he came up with the most twisted idea imaginable. He would use his own family as a criminal organization. He would use the trust they had built over years as a weapon. Ricardo Manukian was 23 years old. He was close friends with Alejandro Puccio, the eldest son. They played rugby together at the same club. They had shared barbecues, birthday parties, matches. On October 14th, 1982, Ricardo was kidnapped. His family received a call demanding $500,000 in ransom. They gathered the money. They paid. Ricardo never came home. His body was found weeks later near a river. 3 gunshots to the head. What nobody knew yet was that while Ricardo was being held captive, he was kept in the bathtub of Alejandro Puccio's own bedroom. The same friend who had invited him to the club, in the same house where they had spent summer afternoons together, and the rest of the family knew. Eduardo Auleg was an industrial engineer, 40 years old. Also close to the Puccio social circle. His family paid $150,000 in ransom. It made no difference. Archimedes had him killed anyway. His body was buried and only discovered 4 years later, in 1987, after the clan was already behind bars. Emilio Naum was the one who fought back. When they tried to force him into the car, he struggled. They shot him on the spot in the street. His body was left there. No ransom, no negotiation. For the Puccios, it was simply a problem solved. While all of this was happening, the Puccio family continued their normal life. Alejandro played rugby at Casi, one of the most prestigious clubs in Argentina. His brother Daniel, nicknamed Maguila, after a cartoon character he resembled, played alongside him. Same matches, same bars, same friends. Epifania, the mother, cooked, received guests, went to church. Her daughters Sylvia and Adriana went out with friends, lived their lives. Every single one of them knew, or at the very least suspected, and not one of them said a word. Perhaps the most disturbing element of this case is not the crimes themselves. It is the active decision of an entire family to look the other way, to decide that comfort was worth more than a human life, and then another, and then another. Archimedes had built something very few criminals ever achieve. A circle of complicity based not on fear, but on blood. Nelida Bellini de Prado was a businesswoman, 50 years old. She was kidnapped in July 1985 and held captive in the basement of the Puccio family home for 32 days. 32 days underground, while life above continued with complete normality. This time, however, something went wrong. Police had been investigating for months. Phone lines were tapped. When Archimedes and Daniel arrived at a gas station to collect the ransom, officers were already waiting. Both were arrested on the spot. Hours later, police units raided the house at Martinia Omar, 544, San Isidro. Alejandro and his girlfriend were watching a movie in the living room. Epifania and Adriana were in the kitchen, Sylvia arrived in the middle of the operation. Down in the basement, officers found Nelida Bolini de Prado, chained, dehydrated, alive. Argentina was shaken by the trial. A country still processing the horrors of its own dictatorship now had to accept that horror had also lived in a suburban house, behind a white fence and a garden with flowers. In 1986, Archimedes Puccio was sentenced to life in prison. Alejandro received the same sentence. He died behind bars in 2008. Daniel fled to Brazil, was captured years later, and extradited back to Argentina. Epifania was released due to lack of direct evidence. Despite living in the same house where a woman was held captive for over a month, the justice system could not prove her active participation. Archimedes obtained conditional release in his final years. He died in 2013. He never showed remorse. What happened inside that house in San Isidro was not just the story of a criminal family. It was the story of how a facade can hold for years when everyone around it chooses not to see. It was the story of a country emerging from dictatorship, discovering that some of its darkest logic had not disappeared with the uniforms, that certain men had learned to use fear as a tool and had simply changed their clothes. That house still stands today. Private property, quiet street, ordinary neighborhood. Neighbors from that era say they never imagined what went on inside. Though if pressed, some admit there was always something off, something that never quite added up, something they chose not to ask about.